Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's event. My name's Nick, and I'm the Networks Manager here at NCVO. And it's great to be here with so many of you online this morning. Over the next 2 hours, with the help of some special guest speakers, we'll explore and discuss the ways of engaging and supporting young people aged 13 to 17 to volunteer. Before we look at today's agenda, let's briefly run through a couple of housekeeping points. So hopefully you'll have noticed that closed captions or subtitles have been enabled. You can turn these on and off by clicking on the CC icon in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. We'll also share a copy of the slides for today in the chat. If it would help with accessibility, you can download this PDF to your computer so that you can zoom in and out of the slides as we go along today. On to other housekeeping matters. We'll have a break partway through today's event at around 11 o'clock. If you have any questions as we go, do add these to the chat and I'll collate them for the Q&A towards the end of today's session. You can also put any comments, reflections, or links to your own work with young people into the chat to share with others online today. With your microphones, please keep these muted until you're in a breakout room or we come to you for a question. And with your cameras, you can have these on or off, but in breakout rooms a little bit later, having them turned on could help the conversation to flow. From our perspective, we're not anticipating any fire alarms today, but please keep an ear out for them wherever you are. And when you're in breakout groups, please do respect confidentiality in terms of what's being shared by others. And finally, we are recording today's event and we may upload the recording to the NCVO YouTube channel. So by being here, you do acknowledge this. So why are we here? So the Networks team here at NCVO, we administer a volunteer managers Google group where volunteer managers share best practice and ask others for advice. Towards the end of last year, there was a steady stream of messages where people were asking for advice about the ways in which young people under the age of 18 have been successfully engaged and supported in volunteer roles. To pick out a few quotes from these messages, we heard that following the pandemic, volunteer roles for young people have come to an end. Young people, however, are really keen to see what other volunteering opportunities are available that provide face-to-face contact and social interaction. However, the opportunities in our area for young people aged 16 to 18 are minimal, with many organisations having a minimum age of 18. This is such a shame as the young people have so much to give. This sentiment was very much echoed by others. So in this quote, it says, "It certainly seems like many of us are struggling to find suitable, meaningful roles for young people. This is such a shame as young people have so much to offer, and now more than ever, they need opportunities to connect with their community, develop new relationships, and build their confidence and soft skills." And on to our final quote, which says, "We have lots of young people who are keen to volunteer, but it's harder to source the mass opportunities that are needed to support this volunteering stream." So why are NCVO delivering this event? So for those of you familiar with our strategy, our first goal is to support, enabling charities to make a bigger difference, bringing members together to find solutions to common problems. And our third goal is to connect, where we aim to create connections across our membership and our networks to facilitate learning, collaboration, and the development of ideas. So although NCVO has an abundance of good practice tools, templates, and training that supports volunteers and volunteering, the part of this volunteering puzzle that is perhaps less developed for us is the expertise around supporting young people, specifically in volunteer roles. But we do know that the good practice, the expertise, and the advice that is being sought by volunteer managers is out there. So for today's event, we've sought that expertise out and have been so fortunate to have some excellent guest speakers who have offered to contribute their time to share this experience and their insight with us today. So today's event is split into two parts. In the first half, we want to inspire you, showcasing age-appropriate volunteering roles that have been designed specifically for young people. And in the second half, we'll cover the practical things that you'll need to consider when engaging 13 to 17-year-olds as volunteers. So in part one, we have Devon and Detty from East Riding's Voluntary Action Services, who will be highlighting some of the successful volunteer roles that they broker and engage young people in. We'll then hand over to Andrew and Daniel from St John Ambulance, who will share with us the various youth volunteering programmes that they offer, how they adapted these programmes during the pandemic, and how they've overcome challenges and took advantage of opportunities. And to wrap up this first half, we'll hear from Becca and Ruqayya from Reclaim, which is a youth leadership and social change organisation in Manchester, who are a small but bold charity who use their experience and platform to support and amplify the voices of working class young people across the city. We'll aim for a 10-minute break just before 11 o'clock. And by the second half of today's event, we want you to be thinking, yes, I do want to support and engage young volunteers, but you might be asking yourselves, what are the practical things that you need to consider before you do this? So to answer these questions and more, Ellie from Community First in Hampshire will cover all of the essential things that you need to consider, from risk assessments and assurance to gaining parental permissions and offering appropriate training and supervision to young people. Hopefully, this will give you lots of food for thought to head away into short breakout sessions to share some initial thoughts that you have about the ways that you could design volunteer roles for 13 to 17-year-olds and support them to have safe volunteer experiences. Or you might want to share some concerns that you have that others could help alleviate. Towards the end of today's event, we'll have time for a Q&A session with today's guest speakers. So please do add questions to the chat as we go along, and we'll collate these together for the end. So just before we wrap up at midday, we'll signpost you to a couple of resources that we'll think will come in handy. So that does sound like a fairly mammoth agenda. And now with a little under 2 hours to get through it all, let's make a start. So our first guest speakers join us from East Riding Voluntary Action Services. And I'm pleased to welcome Devon, who is the Volunteering for Young People within East Riding Development Officer, and Desi Tyler, the Children and Young People Services Coordinator. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hand over to Desi and Devon, and they will kind of talk you through the next kind of 12 minutes or so.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. So Devon's going to share our presentation, and I'll just start off with a few bits of background, because as Nick said, it's a huge agenda as youth volunteering, and it's changed enormously over the last, 15 years or so. URVAS has been delivering youth volunteering activity with young people from the ages of 10 upwards for around about, since 2008, 2009. We've had lots and lots of different projects over the years. We've done buddy projects, volunteer brokerage, lots of green and environmental activities, youth voice. We've got informal programs that are a bit more structured. We've done NCS, and we look at certain locations across our area. I would say I'm going to put some links in the chat for you all, just for some national websites which you might find useful. Obviously, you'll have our contact details, and we're more than happy to have conversations with you after today if you would like to have a bit more of a discussion in regard to developing your own youth volunteering activities. We work very much in partnership with our local schools, colleges, our local authority services that work with young people, including those that are more targeted, so children who are looked after or leaving care, youth justice services, young carers, services that work with special educational needs and disabilities, and also, of course, with the voluntary and community sector across East Riding and in neighbouring authorities. We also work with national organisations, and over the years we've brought in well over £1 million or so from lots of different funders. That may be to do with the kinds of volunteering young people are doing, or it might be to do with the cohorts of young people we're supporting. So all of our work feeds into our local strategic partnerships, which is the Children and Families Partnership Board, the Youth Justice Board, and the Safeguarding Children Partnership. So it's really, really important that you have that wider partnership, because often you'll find there are a lot of volunteering opportunities, as Devon's going to explain next, within organisations locally, such as the police, which is Devon's first presentation, and hospitals, voluntary and community groups, local authority. So there's lots and lots of opportunities, and also obviously in student things like student councils in schools and colleges. So I'm going to hand over to Devon to say a bit now.
Yes, so I'm Devon. I also work for East Riding Voluntary Action Services. I coordinate our training programmes, accreditation programmes as well in there, and also our community hub that we've got in the Bridlington area. I'm quite pleased to say I've worked for URVAS for the last 5 years or so, but I actually started as a volunteer when I was about 12 as well, going through the Viper scheme at the time. And now I've taken on that Viper scheme and redeveloped it so that it covers a wider area than just the East Riding. So I'll start with the first one. In my own time as well through URVAS, I've worked in various different roles, especially starting out in the volunteering project, supporting young people to find appropriate volunteering opportunities. And one of the things for me was that it was difficult to find opportunities without volunteering yourself. So I think one of the things that helps is that you volunteer to help, and then at least you can find opportunities as well. So I've started volunteering with the local police service as a community safety volunteer and as a cadet leader with Humberside Police's police cadets as well. So the volunteer police cadets is a national scheme. It might be available across a number of the different force areas, but in the Humberside alone, we've got 6 locations covering Grimsby, Hull, Bridlington, Gould, Beverley and Scunthorpe. And each unit has between 10 to up to 30 cadets, and some may even have some more as well now. And we start normally in school years, so they start in September, and then they're with us for 3 to potentially 4 years, depending on their age range. Usually it's between 15 to 19-year-olds. And what we find is that they're not usually young people that have to have an interest in joining the police. It's any young person that wants to get involved in anything positive in the community. It's a national uniformed group. They get out and about and do things in the community, as well as having classroom events. Nationally, most of the units offer their sessions on a Wednesday evening, 6 while 8 or 6:30 while 8:30. But there are some where they're slightly different. Depending on the areas they live in as well, they might want to join British Transport Police cadets as well. It's the same sort of scheme, just focused more on British Transport Police's roles as well. The police cadets that we've worked with, they often get involved in completing first aid courses, taking part in team building activities, either against other units, although they are one team, against other units as well, with a bit of healthy competition there, or against national units as well as the regional ones. Some of the fun things that they get to do is throw bricks at police officers as part of the riot training. So there's all sorts of different activities that engage young people and really recognise what they're doing. And the new scheme now allows them to pick up a qualification as well. And there's a link there as well about finding more about just the Humberside scheme. But again, the National VPC website has more information on that. And I'll hand over to Detsy for the next one.
That's great. But just following on from that, I would say have a look at your local uniformed services, because as well as the police, you'll probably find that Humberside, in our area, we've got Humberside Fire and Rescue, and they'll offer different activities. So your local fire and rescue may well offer things as well. And obviously there's things like cadet forces. So it's always worth having a look to see what volunteering opportunities young people can participate in, including more structured things like Duke of Edinburgh schemes, that kind of thing as well. So moving on to the hedge hunters, this is an example of one of our environmental youth volunteering activities that we do in East Riding. It's funded through the Ernest Cook Trust and I Will and the National Lottery Community Fund, who have been fantastic supporters of us really since the beginning of our work with young volunteers in East Riding. So it's fun. It's called the Green Influencer Scheme. It's a national programme, so you may well have green influencers in your area. So it's worth having a look for that. If you've got young people between the ages of 10 and 14 who are interested in environmental projects, it's very much a group-based activity around social action. So it's about young people identifying a green environmental project, which may be around tackling climate change, or it may be more of a sort of a more practical activity, such as litter picking or beach cleans, but something that they can do as a group. And in East Riding, one of our groups of young people decided they were going to work very closely with the University of Hull and their Energy and Environment Institute, which is headed up by Dan Parsons. And some of you may have seen him on national TV. He's very much involved in national work around all sorts of environmental work. So we're very lucky that we have that relationship, and also that we work very closely with his family. So his two children are very involved in our scheme, and what happened was they wanted to map the hedgerow gaps, because it's in order to look at how we can reduce carbon emissions, and how we can look at what our carbon rate is in East Riding, and by identifying the gaps, what do we need to plant in order to offset our carbon emissions. So hedgerows, it was the young people created an app for other young people to be able to identify where there are gaps and to report that in to the University of Hull and their wider hedgerow scheme. But as well as doing the actual kind of mapping of gaps in hedgerows, because East Riding is very much a very rural county, it's 1,000 square miles, very rural, lots of hedgerows, as you can imagine. They got some funding of £5,000, which they applied for from Ernest Cook Trust. And they also developed, as part of that, a series of resource packs for primary school children for across the whole area, which may even go national, because they wanted to show other children and young people what happens if we lose our hedgerows, what lives in hedgerows, what, looking at the different creatures, the birds, the animals. And it was very much something that they wanted to put together. So they've got some books that have been published. They're going out soon, probably after summer. And it's about young people really understanding the importance of hedgerows and how we can plant new ones to reduce our carbon rates. So that was quite a specific piece of work by 10 to 14-year-olds within East Riding. But we have done a lot of, so we have, I'm noticing that people have got a few problems with their cameras and Wi-Fi's. So hopefully you can hear me. So that there was lots of different types of green influencer activity as well. So not just the hedge hunters, but we'll move on to the next slide, Devon. The next slide is very much around our youth voice work and youth parliament in particular. So in East Riding, we haven't had a member of youth parliament or a kind of East Riding youth parliament since 2012, it would be. And what we wanted to do was work with our partners and with young people to draw down funding from the National Lottery Community Fund to really develop our youth voice work. And we've called it Volunteering Voice, and it's helped us to get involved with the British Youth Council to run our elections for members of Youth Parliament. So we now have 2 members of Youth Parliament in East Riding. There was 5,000 young people, or over 5,000 young people, who participated in the election. There were 25 young people who stood for election. The votes took place in February. They elected, as I say, 2 members of Youth Parliament and also 2 deputies. We worked very, very closely with our schools, our colleges, our post-16 providers, very much having to do this with the local authority, who were very supportive. So it's very, I would encourage you to link in with your local authorities, and particularly services that work with young people, including those that focus on education. Obviously, we've got electively home educated young people across the country, so it's important to make sure that they also get the chance and the opportunity to participate. Making sure that children, people with SEND also get those opportunities to participate. So we provided, working with our democratic services, we provided ballot boxes, polling booths, including those that were adapted for children, people with mobility issues, and provided those to all the schools for them to keep, so that they could also continue with their democratic experiences in the future. Then we had the election results on the 3rd of March, which were announced by our Chief Executive of the Council, who's Caroline Lacey, who was our returning officer. So it's very much done in the format of an adult election, if you like. Wanted to make it very much the same things, that young people understand the process, because part of it is about encouraging young people to vote when they become adults. So now the young people are on with their induction. They've taken part in a residential. They've got another residential at the end of July, with members of Youth Parliament from across the country who are coming together for their annual conference, which actually is at the University of Hull again, so that's fantastic. That's just up the road from us. We also did our Make Your Mark ballot, which was part of the national ballot British Youth Council run, and they chose 4 key areas. Well, the top 4 areas were improving jobs, opportunities and training. So they're currently developing an app to be able to provide information to young people in a way that they will access it about jobs and training locally. Improving mental health. So there's a lot of work going on around mental health and emotional well-being, which, as Nick said about the pandemic, it's had huge impact on young people across the whole of the country, and in East Riding the same. So it's about how we can work with young people to adapt and develop things that will meet their needs. But of course, you need a lot of partners on board with that as well. You need a lot of decision makers to listen to young people. Climate change and the environment is a huge area that young people are very, very passionate about. And we've got a environmental youth summit on the 16th of July, and also looking at how we can help young people to keep safe. So there's a lot of work going on with that. So all of this will feed into our first meeting of the East Riding Youth Council, which is starting, I think that's on the 20th of July. And that will link very much with our East Riding Adult Council as well, and partner agencies. So moving on to the next slide, which is more general really, because there's lots and lots of work we do with young people and have done with young people over the years around youth volunteering. So for instance, a lot of young people are very involved in setting up youth clubs and youth action projects and things that, you know, they want things to do, particularly in rural areas. I'm sure everybody anyway, not just in rural areas, you know, young people say there's nothing to do. It may just be that there's nothing much to do that they're interested in. So, you know, in East Riding, we've, like I say, 1,000 square miles of rural area, but we have 1,000 groups that work with children and young people, providing a range of activities. But of course, you know, that's actually not a lot. So it's about how we can get young people to get active and to look at how they can establish their own thing. Youth clubs, running, you know, things like festivals over the holidays. We've had a virtual one we delivered during COVID. They want to set up sport activities. They want to help out at sport activities and music activities and art activities. And they often are, you know, they're often already volunteering. They just don't know it. And sometimes that's the best place to start. Let's work with those young people who are already volunteering, but just aren't really aware that that's what they're doing. And that's how our project started. Like I say, you know, back in 2009, there was young people who were helping out at sports clubs, helping out in school with their tuck shops, helping out at youth clubs. So we just started recognizing that and encouraging them with that. We've got young people who get involved with arts projects. We've just been part of a East Riding wide puffin project, which is like a trail along our coast where they've done like the giant puffins they've painted, and that'll be part of like a trail. So they've helped to do their own in Withensea. We do a lot of graffiti art projects, particularly with young people involved in youth offending services who might do some reparation work to prepare an area. I know Devon's done a lot of work with youth justice services over the years. Where, you know, they may well prepare like a bridge, for instance, for painting, and then other young people will volunteer to actually graffiti it. But some of the young people involved with youth offending will get involved with that as well. So they start to volunteer and take on other things. So it's a good way of engaging with them. And we do more traditional things like volunteer brokerage. So if we have young people who want some experience in something, you know, because that's what they'd like to do for a career, then we will try very hard to find them a suitable opportunity by working with all our partners. So for instance, if you look at the hospital up the road from us, they offer lots and lots of different opportunities for young people from the ages of 16. We've got a variety of different voluntary and community groups offering things. We've got other services. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Devon.
Yes, so following on quite nicely, I haven't got any more slides. I've just put this one as a holding slide. But following nicely on from the volunteer brokerage scheme, we also provide our VYP awards. So in East Riding, it's called Viper because it stands for Volunteering for Young People within East Riding. But more generally, we call it Volunteering for Young People Awards in general, so that it covers a wider area. And generally, the Viper scheme is an award scheme. So young people can volunteer for so many hours and then they'll be able to achieve those awards and those certificates. Usually it's 30, 60 and 90 volunteering hours. But then we worked with a steering group of young people who were well achieving over or above that, and they created some more as well. And so we're happy to work with organisations to personalise their awards. Now, it was free and funded by our local authority until we'd lost that funding. So we've had to make it sustainable. And so it's a charged for scheme now, but we don't charge the young people. We're quite pleased to say that it's the organisations that want to recognise the young people for volunteering that pay for these. But we've got a few different models. So sometimes the schools will purchase a scheme so that the whole of their school and any young person that's volunteering can benefit from the certificates in their area. And other times it's the voluntary organisations that really want to give back and recognise the young people as well. And so we'll try and work with both organisations, depending on the pricing structures, to make sure that the young people are getting the benefit of the whole of the scheme as well. One of the things that we did do as a request from one of the sixth form colleges, they found that work experience was too expensive in terms of the insurance costs and everything else that was needed. And so we'd stepped in instead to provide a volunteering experiences session instead. So it's a bit like work experience, but instead we go in and find the young people volunteering opportunities that match with the careers sectors that they wanted as well. So we'd found things with volunteering with such as the CPS, the local police, all the way through to a local solicitors firm, and different types of volunteering opportunities such as environmental work as well. So it really did range, and we found a little bit of a stretch to find those opportunities in some of the areas, but we'd managed to place, I think it was around over 2,000 young people with different providers across 2 different schools that had purchased that scheme. So we have put our contact details on here as well. So if you are interested in establishing the Viper scheme or the VYP awards, please do get in touch with me, because we can look at providing support to your organisation to do that, and we can discuss how we've done it as well. And Detty's details are on there as well if you want more information about the Volunteer and Volunteer Voice projects as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Devon and Detty. It's great to hear about like the showcase of different volunteering opportunities that you've got for young people in East Ridings, and to hear things at a local level that's happening. But we can now kind of look at kind of a national organisation. And so I'm pleased to hand you over to Andrew Priest, who is the Youth Services Manager, and Daniel Leons, the Head of Youth Development at St John's Ambulance. So over to you, Andrew and Daniel.
Good morning all. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Thrilled to be joining you all. Really exciting. I mean, the last presentation talk about setting the bar high. So I will try my best, and Andrew will do the same, to kind of break down and share some of our experiences, some of the opportunities and how we engage with young people in St John Ambulance. So as you've just heard, I'm Daniel Lyons. I'm the Head of Young People Development for St John Ambulance across England and the Isles. And I'll hand over to Andrew to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Andrew. I'm Youth Services Manager for St John. So I'm a volunteer as a senior volunteer within St John Ambulance.
Well, thanks, Andrew. So just to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the opportunities as a highlight, and then we'll get a little bit into kind of what specifically young people did with us through the pandemic, and on the back end of that, what have been some of the challenges, the lessons learned, and the opportunities that we've now kind of trying to deal with in bringing forward for young people. So slightly out of scope, we start with our badger age range. We've had badgers for 35 years in their current form, 35 years this year. Bertie Badger is our mascot, so Bertie Badger is now 35, and that's a program for 5 to 10-year-olds, focusing on social interaction.
I think we might have lost Daniel there. Andrew, are you able to pick up with the next slide?
Yeah, let me just, I just need to get you to share, or I can share.
Oh, yeah, I can share. Bear with me 1 second. So is that the right slide for you there, Andrew?
Yeah, that is. So yeah, we've just picking up. So we also have our cadet scheme, which is for 10 to 18-year-olds. That predominantly is around encouraging young people to get involved in event first aid, as well as also learning first aid and being able to carry out some social action. NHS Cadets is one of our new schemes, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. So NHS Cadets is supported within and by NHS England, and that's looking at a slightly different programme, more around trying to reach some of those communities that we can't always reach, and it's about trying to encourage young people to think about a career in healthcare, and then also be able to try and do some social action and volunteering placements within the healthcare system. Health Citizens is a shorter programme, predominantly aimed at some of our older young people, and we do some coaching and mentoring with them just around lots of different social skills, and also work with them around teaching and being able to promote certain educations being within their area. And after that, they then work on a short social action project with an area of interest that's predominantly around health. where we would like them to be able to deliver something back into their community, and within an area of their interest. And we have mentors that will support them through that. Young Responders, again, is another shorter program, and this one is more about getting young people to do peer education with other young people, in the view that they might be able to learn some life-saving skills that they might be able to use in certain difficult circumstances. So it's very much around, short sessions with young people, and providing them with life-saving skills should they obviously come across some very difficult situations within their communities. So if we can go to the next slide.
Great, and I think Daniel is back online with us as well now. I think he's just come back into the room.
So I'll pick up on this one, and then hopefully we'll go back to Daniel. So volunteering through COVID, predominantly I'm going to talk about our cadet programs, and a little bit around our Badger programs, because a lot of our other programs that I've just talked about are either going through their pilot phase, or we've just started to launch them during the pandemic. So for our young people, mostly for our cadets, it was a bit of a challenging time for them, because obviously they were heavily engaged in face-to-face activity. We had to move a lot of that onto virtual, which actually some of our young people helped lead the way on that. They're very more able to support technology, perhaps more than some of our adults. So some of them were really great in designing some more resources, creating more resources, and also supporting some of our sessions. But also, obviously, where some organisations were a bit at a hold during the pandemic, St John Ambulance continued, and we obviously had our sort of national appeal and our national work to help support our communities. And so a lot of our young people initially, where we obviously stopped doing face-to-face activity within the first phases of COVID, some of our young people wouldn't be able to engage in face-to-face volunteering as well. So a lot of the young people were involved in fundraising, and that was very much led by them, and they did a huge job in trying to various different walks around gardens and lots of different little things that they did, dyeing their hair, loads and loads of things that they did to try and help fundraise for St John Ambulance. As obviously things perhaps eased a little bit, equally our young people still wanted to be involved, they still wanted to help. So we were able to set up some of our older young people, some of our older cadets, supporting our logistics hub. So you can see there's a chap there that was sorting out some of the protective equipment, which we were needing to send out for our ambulance crews, who were also supporting the NHS with some of the auxiliary ambulance services. And as times changed, we then moved to supporting the vaccination centres. So a lot of our young people who have been able to do demonstrator courses to be able to be a bit like a peer educator, some of them were helping support the hyper centres, which were not only just training our current volunteers, but also training other volunteers who also came alongside to help support the vaccination centres. And again, for our older volunteers, so from 14 and above, we were starting to able, for those that obviously don't have any underlying health conditions, to start supporting vaccination centres. So we were able, obviously they weren't the people doing the actual vaccinations, but we were having volunteers come in to support the patient care, patient advocate roles. So that was about supporting patients when they come in from vaccination, and then also helping to monitor, reassure people after they've had their vaccination. And something we were also able to do was set up a national cadet conference, which was led by a lot of our young people. And again, that was all done virtually. And also on YouTube, there is some videos of some of our cadets who have done videos and video blogs talking about their experiences at some of the at some of the vaccination centres, which was really great at, trying to sell our story and also just raise that awareness of what some of our young people have been doing. If we go to the next slide, is Daniel back?
We will give it a try. Let's try again. I paid for upgrade to fibre optic, but clearly that is still not enough in the Welsh valleys. So let's try once more. So some of the challenges, I'm not going to run through these point by point. I'm going to just kind of summarize some of the things that we experienced. So a lot of our new strategy when we started, and we just kind of started heading into COVID, and a number of our change programs kind of aligned in order to deliver to that, of which Andrew hopefully talked to you about when I was offline. So particularly around our NHS Cadet program, which is all around how do we work in partnership with the NHS and health providers to reach communities that are underrepresented in the health workforce. So naturally, the whole NHS had to reshift and regear and focused on the COVID response. So their priority was not necessarily getting in more volunteers into those risky areas. So that created some major challenges for us. Beyond that, it's also around how does an organisation like St John Ambulance mobilise to reach young people and support communities in their health that we haven't previously had a strong relationship with? Where do we need to be? Who needs us the most? Where can we be of the most impact and benefit to communities? That's what our new strategy was all around, creating active health citizens. So really, partnership is where it needed to start, and that would be my number one advice to any organisation thinking around engaging with young people in new communities. It's not a space to kind of operate on your own. It's very much around partnership and the huge value, and even on the scale in which we operate, we very much recognise that we don't have the capacity or the capabilities to work with some of these communities right now, and it's about how do we build some of that ability. So even though we've worked with young people for over 100 years, we know that to reach those new communities that we're currently underrepresenting in our volunteering, or that we're trying to help with because they face additional health challenges and are the least equipped to deal with them, we need to do that through partnership, which again has been a major challenge in COVID, of finding those partners and being able to engage. So shameless plug, if there's any of you here that think that you're wanting to partner, or you're wanting to find out more about our new programs, particularly our NHS cadets, young responders or health citizens, with those communities of young people who are care experienced or young carers, we know that those communities have increased and they've faced greater challenges. But really what we've created now is a space in which young people are able to carve that out. So we've spent a lot of time and investment around co-creation and co-production with young people. Young people have shown us that they were the most flexible through COVID. They were able to adapt rapidly into a virtual space, yes, with challenges, but they adopted that and kind of led the way for the organisation. And what we did was create space for that to happen and provided support structures to enable and support it even further. So young people at the heart of decision making has been really key for us. It was already on the agenda, and that's the single piece of work that's really accelerated through this period. So now we've got young trustees, we've got youth forums at every level of our organisation, leading in and providing a space and a voice for carving out new opportunities for young people to volunteer, to be involved and to shape the future of St John Ambulance. We've provided a commitment for young people to be involved in our selection process, for other staff and senior volunteers, for young people to be involved in our steering groups and our programme boards and our project groups, even where it's not focused towards young people, because they will provide a perspective and they are a major part of the communities in which we serve. So that's been kind of a major opportunity that we've picked up on, and as I've said, has really accelerated some of our work in those areas. Especially where in new services, so young responders and health citizens in particular, that we know we weren't reaching some of those communities. So whether, as I mentioned already, young people in care or care experience, young people at greater risk of street violence, young people who provide care for others in their family or their communities. So we sat out and we listened. Our earlier services in the iteration of this of our strategy was around how can we build those services and people join and they kind of progress through as you might normally expect. We are a uniformed youth service. Our new programs are not uniformed because we recognise for some people that's a barrier, whether it's financial or whether it's about their experience of other people in uniforms has not necessarily been a positive one. So we've stripped away some of that to recognise actually that's a barrier to some people accessing. And again, that came from co-design and co-creation, real insight and investment in listening to young people. And the latest service, so we moved on from that very kind of traditional structured approach of delivering services for young people. Our latest and our smaller scale at the moment is our Health Citizens, which is all around listening to young people, providing them with some training and some skills and coaching and mentorship around projects. So project management, identifying health issues that affect their communities, helping them to build on a small scale a project to address what they perceive as being the health issue. That might be anything from mental health as a result of loneliness, through to food poverty, through to physical needs due to carers and falls within the elderly community, whatever they deem as being that issue. Building a project, delivering the project, and then we work with the young people at the end to say, actually, what you've just done is a project. We haven't labeled it as so at the beginning. So then working with them to be able to utilize that in their CV, in job interviews, in interviews or applications for college or university. So now they are an active health citizen. They are able to deliver and operate and mobilize within communities to positively affect the health of their communities. In the meantime, they've built up their profile, their skills, experience, and confidence, and we provide ongoing coaching after they've finished the project to help them kind of reach that destination. And I'll hand over to Andrew.
If we can go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit on how we were sort of returning to face-to-face activity. Obviously, once the National Youth Agency guidelines changed and we were able to sort of start to pick up some of those things. So firstly, we needed to sort of look at our buildings and make sure that they were obviously all fit for purpose. Some of that was was easier because we were already starting to open up some of our buildings for some of our adult activity and also for some of our training activity. So we were able to sort of share on the risk assessments that were needed for that. But within our youth units, we needed to do activity risk assessments just to make sure that we're being, COVID safe. But also we needed to look at our individual health risk assessments. So our young people still had risk assessments, but in line with COVID and perhaps some changes, we just needed to make sure that we were just reviewing that. And obviously just in case young people's health had changed, just to make sure that obviously we're making sure that they're all safe. And also reviewing, perhaps it meant that as we were sort of returning back to some of our event activities, some of our other volunteering activities, whilst training is probably okay, we might just have to review, is it safe for them to perhaps be able to go on an event or just be sort of more exposed? So we've sort of worked through that. Alongside that, we built a returning to youth activity national framework. So that sort of various people within our teams spent a lot of time building that up, but then also communicating that across the country to our volunteers and our youth leaders to make sure that people were aware of the risk assessments and the health risk assessments that we were required. But also alongside that, we also got some of our cadets to also do some videos for our young people as well, about what they need to look out for when they're joining when they're coming back, when they're returning, to try and make sure that everyone is feeling safe and happy to re-engage with us. If we could just go to the next slide, please. So where are we at now? Obviously, like most organisations, we've been able to kind of return back to training. This is our first year back where we're having summer camps, which is really great to see. So we've got a number of camps across all of our sort of regions. And obviously we've been able to perhaps re-engage back with residential activity, which we know our young people love doing. So we did, I appreciate the picture's not great there, but the one in the meeting room down at the bottom, we launched a young reporters scheme, which is around encouraging young people to be able to use different sources of media, interviewing other people within their communities to be able to start selling their story and selling the great work that they're doing, which has taken off really well across the organisation. We've also been able to obviously carry on with some of our D&V activity. Events and hostel volunteering is now started to continue. And also during COVID, we've been able to sort of look at perhaps some of the barriers of some of our event volunteering, and also commence some pilots, which is where we've got the nighttime economy. So we're still piloting that at the moment, but what we're allowing is some of our 16-year-old cadets and above, they're able to engage in some of those volunteering activity as well. Obviously, there's a little bit more of a risk there because of people with drugs and alcohol, but it's also about being able to give people exposure. You know, a young person at 17, we say they can't necessarily go on these events, but suddenly they're 18 and they're allowed to go on those events as an adult. So it's about being able to have some controlled environments as much as we can, make it safe and controlled. And sometimes that could be with a time restriction, or, you know, where they're able to go in terms of the actual site. So we're working on that pilot at the moment. And as Daniel said, it's our cadet centenary this year. So across the organisation, we're having to raise awareness of young people within St John. It's our year of youth. So we've got a number of events that are going on to sort of celebrate our 100 years of youth work, alongside obviously Bertie's birthday as well. And now what we're thinking about, I guess what I should also say is, where we had some of our young people who joined externally to St John to support the vaccination centres, we are now starting to look at how we obviously engage them within our St John activity to help with event volunteering. And that's led us to kind of think a bit more about a hybrid model for some of our older young people, especially around the fact that actually a lot of our young people, I guess even when you're 13 up to 17, they often are still engaged in lots of different clubs and lots of different other activity. So actually some of the feedback that's being told to us is our current model of kind of going to a unit face-to-face each week sometimes doesn't actually always work for them, even if we'd like to be able to obviously promote that. So we're now sort of starting to think about some of those virtual units that we set up during COVID. How can we change that? So is it that some of our young people will do some virtual sessions, but then every 6 weeks we'll do some face-to-face activity, just to kind of think about, you know, a bit of a hybrid model, but we also acknowledge that there is some virtual fatigue there. So it's just sort of giving us some points of reflection, just to kind of see if we can actually make it, you know, our volunteering activity even more flexible for our young people, so that we can kind of help them with their training and their education, as well as obviously completing programs. And as Daniel said before, we're now starting to get back on track. We're trying to engage those new communities and really try and foment the work that we were trying to do before amongst those new programs.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew and Daniel, for sharing that kind of presentation. Obviously, this slide kind of says any questions. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat, and we'll collate them for the end of the session and the Q&A session that we've got just in lead up to 12 o'clock. But so we've heard from kind of a rural area in the East Ridings. We've heard from St John, who've looked at a national picture of their kind of youth organisations. But it's now time to kind of hand over to an urban environment and to hear from Becca and Rukaya, who are joining us from Reclaim. So I can stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to the two of them to talk you through the next kind of 15 minutes or so.
Brilliant. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Really, really appreciate you spending your Thursday morning. Took me a minute there to remember what day it was, but your Thursday morning with us. I'm Becca. I am the Campaigns and Networks Officer here at Reclaim. And then I will let Rukaya introduce herself as well.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm here. It's nice to see you all today. And again, thank you for spending your Thursday morning with us. I'm Rukaya. I'm 21. I'm a law student. I'm the co-chair of Young Manchester and the founder of Muslim Northern Women. But prior to that, I was a young person at Reclaim for around 4 to 5 years, and I did a lot of volunteering and campaigning with them. So I'll be speaking about that today.
Brilliant. So what we'll do is I will share my presentation, which should go for about 7 minutes or so. And then I will pass on to Rakaya, and she will talk about her experience being a young person at Reclaim and just being a general boss. So I'm looking forward to hearing from her as well. So I'll share my screen now. And then you guys can let me know if you can see that. Brilliant. Like I said, I am Becca. I am a campaigns and networks officer here at Reclaim. And we are a charity that aims to empower young working class people. And we do that through our programs and through our campaigns. I mostly work on the campaign side, but I've also been on the other side, which is the program side. And for the next 7 minutes or so, I will be chatting to you guys about how to engage young people to become change makers. Before we start, what is campaigning? I feel like there's a big word, big misconception about what it is. It feels really complicated, but really it's quite simple. It's doing something to change something. So if you don't like something, how do we change it? And often that is how we talk to our young people about campaigning. What is it in your local area that is kind of rubbish? And what is it that you want to change? And often we hear lots of words about it. We hear lots of military terms about it, like mobilization, ground game, air war, etc. But it's much simpler than that. And that's how we put it across. So it covers quite a bit. Campaigning can be used for good. We've seen it in the past and in the present. And it can be used for bad. So we try and get our young people to use it for good, of course. So yeah, that is kind of what campaigning is. I'm going to talk you guys through some of the campaigns we have had so far. In the image below, with the castle in the background, this was our full-time fierce residential a few years ago. I think Rakaya was in this one.
I was in the one on the right.
This was before my time, but this was a few young women that went on a residential to talk about just being powerful women and how they could impact their environment and how they could start campaigns about being a woman, about the language that is used for women, and about just sexism and anything related to gender, really. So we did that a few years ago, and we've got a second full-time fierce cohort happening at the minute with 16 to 18-year-olds, which our senior program manager is leading. And it's going extremely well. Love hearing what they're doing at the minute, which is awesome. And then on the left, right there, we were working with our Lee cohort for our Lads Night In. So as you can see, it says real men don't, crossed out cry. And we were exploring toxic masculinity and exploring what it means to express your feelings and express who you are as a young male. And for a lot of our young people, this was super liberating. And we really got to dive into what it meant to them. Just being a young man in Lee, in Greater Manchester, and how they could express themselves more. So that was a great campaign that we did. On the right over there, that is a campaign that Rakaya took part in, and it was called Stop the Nastiness. They got to meet John Breakout, and it was about the language used in politics. And I don't know if I'm sure you've all watched politics before, and sometimes the language that can be used isn't the best. So our young people went down to the House of Parliament, had a chat with John Breakout, and expressed themselves as to how they could change the language that was used. I'm sure Rakaya will dive into that a little bit further. So those are some of the campaigns we've had in the past. I've not included some of our current campaigns, which are the second cohort of Full-Time Fierce, also our campaigners group, which is for young campaigners to come together and talk about what they would like to change, and also make links. I think for a lot of our young working class people, finding a way into the campaigning sphere is really quite complicated. So we want to make sure that we are matching them up with people that are already in that sphere, working in it, and that they can have some form of influence in that area of work. So that's what we've done so far. So these are our programs / campaigns approach. The reason why I've put these two images up there is that this was our Bolton cohort on the left, and this was our Bolton cohort as well on the right. So we work with schools, and we were commissioned by the Bolton Council to go in and talk to the young people, which were year 8 and year 9. Actually, they were year 7 and year 8 at the time. And then by the time we finished and COVID, well, ended kind of, they were year 10s and year 11s. So that's quite interesting. But we went in and talked about class and talked kind of about their own power. When we go in to do sessions, which is our program side of things, when we go in to do initial sessions in schools, the young people kind of usually don't have aren't too clued up about class and potentially what class they would be and potentially what power they have. So we really work from the ground level up and kind of try and empower them and let them realize what impact they can have individually and what impact their voice has. So that starts with making changes within the schools, and then we kind of get their take on what they're interested in, what they want to change. And that leads us to our campaign side. So once we started that ground up approach, we moved to campaigns. So what do you want to change? And a lot of our young people in Bolton were talking about climate change. So we had a climate change event happening 3 weeks ago, actually quite recently, in Manchester. And this is our Bolton cohort doing a play on the impact of climate change as a young person, and especially as a working class young person. Oftentimes climate change is quite gate-kept by just middle class. It's the voice that is the most prevalent is the middle class voice. So we wanted to make sure to include the working class voice within that. And I don't know if I previously mentioned, but when I say working class, I mean economic capital, which is how much money someone might have. I mean social capital, which is who they might know. And I mean cultural capital, which is the ability to fit in within the prevailing culture. So that doesn't include race, it doesn't include background, and working class looks very diverse, as you can see, which is what we're trying to kind of put across as well. So getting into the nitty-gritty, how to engage young people politically. So this was our We the Change event, and as I previously said, this was our full-time Fierce cohort. Our We the Change event was done with an array of charities within Manchester, and this was a KISO group, which is a performing arts group in Manchester and a performing arts charity in Manchester. And we paired up with them to put on a night of change making, a night of performances. So the way we engage young people is that we meet them where they are. We go to their communities, we go to them, and we kind of, like I previously mentioned, we teach them from the ground up. There's no expectation for them to know about campaigning. I think most adults don't know about campaigning, and there's no expectation for them to be pros. But we kind of just talk to them like normal people. So with the way we engage them in campaigns is that we will go to their communities. Reclaim was found out of Moss Side, Manchester. And so it kind of started there. And because it was found there, a lot of our young people who are now adults have kind of followed that trend. And we try and always go to them. So we've got cohorts in Rochdale, we have got cohorts in Lee, we have got cohorts in Manchester, and hopefully, and in Bolton. but we will rent out facilities in their own communities and then do sessions in their communities. Because especially if they are working class young people, cost of travel, lunch, practicalities, if they are young carers and they look after their younger siblings, they might not be able to travel very far. So we want to eliminate as many barriers as possible, and we want to think about those things beforehand, because they can't be effective change makers and campaigners if their bellies aren't full. So there's some real just like basic youth work that goes into making people great campaigners. So what is diversity, and how can we engage a range of young people? Like I said, we go to people's schools and neighborhoods. We're a working class charity, therefore we work with working class young people. We go specifically to typically working class areas, like I said, capital, social capital, economic capital, and cultural capital, and we try and measure that. Working class is diverse. But also, I think just some food for thought for you guys. If you are trying to attract a diverse range of young people, I know that maybe we might have it better because we are in a more urban area, we're in Manchester, but it's worth thinking about who's writing your programs. How are your programs written? I personally don't want to sit through a boring program, and I'm sure the young people don't want to either. So how is it engaging? Is the young person's voice within the program, or have you just written it and then said, this is what we're doing? With all our programs, we try and get young people involved in writing it themselves, because if they feel like they're leading the program, then they are more likely to be engaged themselves. Who's in your team? You typically attract what you are. So how diverse is your team? How diverse are the people that you are working with? I know that as a young person, well, when I was a young person, I'm soon turning 27, so I don't know if I count as a young person anymore, but when I was a young person, what helped me engage in voluntary action was seeing Black people being in the charity sector and working in the charity sector and thinking, actually, maybe that's what I want to do, or maybe these people look like me and they're doing this, so why shouldn't I? So that's some food for thought there. And what language are you using? Like I said, we try and remove any barriers with anything that we do, and language might be one of them. If you are using really, really professional language for a group of working class year 8s, they might not engage. And I've learned the hard way. I started in the charity sector straight out of uni, and I was using uni jargon and it didn't work. So just thinking about that as well. I thought I would end on a high note to say that there is hope. Young people are politically engaged, and even if they aren't always volunteering with us, some people stay with us in a volunteer capacity and come back, and some people don't. We know that we have created a base level kind of knowledge for them to know their own power and know that they have the power to change the world around them. So I would say that that is pretty awesome. And if you'd like to get involved, I will pop my email and Rakaya's email if she wants me to in the chat. So you can email either of us. I'll also pop the website in the chat. We have got our newsletter that you can keep up to date with what we're doing. I've got a little QR code there. I'm not sure if it works through a screen, but try it and see. And then we have an awesome webinar coming up. We'd love to, cheeky plug, we'd love to invite all your young people age 16 to 25. We have some awesome guest speakers, Nahela Ashraf, who is the co-chair of Stand Up to Racism Manchester, and Jess Lee, who is the Youth Mental Health and Violence Against Women and Girls activist. in Manchester and Greater Manchester. It's on the 12th of July from 4 till 5 p.m. and I think your young people would massively benefit from coming. So I'll pop the webinar link in the chat as well, and we'd love to see you all there. And that is us, that is me. So I'll pass on to Rakaya and I'll stop sharing my screen. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for that, Becca. So I'm aware of time, so I know we're running a bit over time, so I'm going to be really quick. Well, as quick as I can. So like I said, I'm Rakaya, I'm 21, law student, and I had been involved with Reclaim for around 4 to 5 years, working on various different projects and campaigns. Some of them I co-created, others I just kind of joined and went on from there. So I'm going to answer some basic questions first. So what inspired me to get involved with Reclaim is kind of what Becca talked about. I just wanted to show what working class meant in 21st century Britain, and the fact that working class, you know, we're a very diverse group of people, whether that's, you know, ethnically, religiously, whatever it is. And I just wanted to basically campaign and shout about getting more diverse voices heard in leadership and decision-making positions in our society. Obviously, a lot of that includes politics, so a lot of my focus was a bit more political, and that's the case for a lot of our young campaigners, but not all of them. And what was it like to be a young campaigner at Reclaim? It was absolutely amazing. I think that's the space where I developed most of my skills to go on and do so many things after that, which I'll briefly touch upon in the end. One of the most successful things that we did, well, that I did as part of my time there have been many things, but personally for me, it was co-leading the If We Did This campaign, also called Stop the Nastiness. So there was kind of 2 hashtags going on there. And that's where a group of us young Reclaim campaigners just came together and called out the derogatory and inflammatory language used within politics. And this campaign went a little bit viral. So we managed to meet with ex-Speaker John Bercow. We spoke to him on BBC News down in London at the Parliament. And yeah, it was a pretty amazing opportunity to be able to show like some of the double standards that happen. So like politicians are able to get away with things that us as young working class people will never be able to get away with, things like that. And I also, during my time as a Reclaim young person, I got to represent the voices of the working class young people through a variety of different events and spaces. So for example, something I can recall off the top of my head, the GMYCA, which is the Greater Manchester Youth Combined Authority. And that's a space that our mayor, Andy Burnham, has created for young people. And there's like different groups and organizations represented there, and young people sit as the head of those kind of groups. Or other various panels like IPPR North or the Manchester City Council, stuff like that. So you get to work with a lot of adults, to be honest, and just to be able to represent young people as a young person, I think it was so powerful and important, and that's why I loved Reclaim. It was such a bold way of making young people's voices heard, and it gives us the opportunity to volunteer as well. So what made me stay at Reclaim for that long? And I still, even though I'm not a young person at Reclaim anymore, I go down to the office all the time and I keep up to date with what's going on. So I stayed because of the incredible staff there and just the amazing opportunities that I got, that I had. And I don't know, it was just like the network of campaigners and young people that they were able to bring together, even during the pandemic and stuff. It was just incredible. And just the opportunities that you got. So I know I've talked about some of them right now, but another memorable one was representing the voices of marginalized women, including those from working class backgrounds, in places like the EU Parliament in Brussels. It's just absolutely incredible opportunities that I would have never had I not been part of Reclaim. And since then, as I mentioned briefly at the very start, I've gone on to become the co-chair of Young Manchester, which is an organization that works to improve the lives of children and young people in the city by providing them with opportunities for youth and play activities. And it's just, to be able to be on board level representing the voices of young people, it's just such a meaningful way to share power. I'm able, alongside with some other young trustees, so we have 2 more young trustees on the board, we're able to make funding opportunities and, provide this very unique insight on pieces of work that the charity is going on to do. I mean, right now we even have over half the staff at Young Manchester are under 25, so majority young people. We are currently shaping the role of co-CEO, so the CEO role will be split, and the co-CEO, one of them is going to be under 25, so there'll be a young person, just like the co-chair role. So it's just, yeah, just incredible opportunities. We also have, so as part of Young Manchester, for I think it's 19 to 25-year-olds, it's called the City of Social Action Fund. Young people as individuals are able to receive up to 1,000 to run their own social action projects, and if they have an organization, they're able to receive, I think it's up to £7,000, but that's for 19 to 25-year-olds, which I'm conscious is slightly above the age group we're targeting today. But we also have the Young Ambassadors program for younger young people to get involved in Manchester, if you know anybody, to help shape the work that Young Manchester does. And we do a lot of work in partnerships with a whole range of organizations here, especially youth organizations. And I've also gone on to co-found a supplementary school in Manchester called Rekindle School. Again, check it out. They have quite a few volunteering opportunities. They work with university students, and these university students go on and volunteer to help with homework support or any other sort of activities that the school runs for the younger people. So this school, I think it's 13 to 16-year-olds that are able to attend this school. I know their capacity is currently full, but I'm sure there will be spaces opening up in the near future. And I've now it's a very newly founded initiative. I founded the Muslim Northern Women Initiative, which is an initiative working to challenge and dismantle Islamophobia towards Muslim women in the UK. And yeah, that's just some of the amazing opportunities I've had because of my, opportunity to volunteer at Reclaim for that long and develop my skills. And just 3 quick pieces of advice from me. Please do not underestimate young people and their abilities ever. There are so many young people I know, including myself, who have co-created projects even before the age of 18. I co-created my first project at 16 and then led that successfully in a group of adults. The second thing is involve young people as advisors in your organizations to help shape your work. This will not only help engage more young people in your work, but will provide them with meaningful skills and opportunities and volunteering roles within the organization. And where you're able to, please remunerate young people for their time. It makes them feel that they're valuable, and that will obviously make them volunteer more and stay more engaged in work because they are giving up time to do that. So yeah, sorry I tried to go as quickly as I could, and thank you so much for listening.
Rukai, I can say on behalf of everyone on the call today, we definitely wanted to hear your story, and thank you for kind of being so open and sharing your experiences. It's really incredible to hear. So that brings an end to the first part of today, where we hope to inspire you about ways in which you can engage young people, 13 to 17-year-olds, as volunteers in your organisations. But our brilliant speakers have gone kind of one step further. They've also started to offer you that kind of practical tips. So from East Ridings, we've heard about the importance of reward and recognition through programs like their kind of Viper scheme. For St John, we had that tip about kind of working in partnership with other organisations when you're thinking about building kind of new programs to engage young people. And then from Reclaim, about when you're thinking about those programs, make sure that you're bringing young people into the design and development of those programs and those volunteer roles from the very beginning to make sure that they're really engaging for them and they're the type of roles that they want to take on. So on that point, we are running a little bit over time today. So let's take a 5-minute break and let's be back on screens by 11:23. We'll have 20 minutes to cover some practicalities. We'll then have a short time for breakout groups. And do kind of post your questions into the chat. We won't have time to have a Q&A with the guest speakers today, but we'll make sure that if they're not answered in the chat itself, that we'll kind of send them to the guest speakers and we'll include any answers to your questions in a follow-up email. So let's take 5 minutes. You can turn off your camera. Please don't leave the call, and we'll be back here at 11:23. So that was a fairly short break. Sorry for that, but we do need to crack on with our second section, which is all about the kind of practical things that you should be considering before you start to kind of draw up your plans to engage young people in volunteer roles in your organisation. So I'm pleased to now hand you over to Ellie from Community First to talk you through the handbook that she produced around engaging young volunteers and the practical steps that you should put in place. So Ellie, over to you.
So hello, my name is Ellie and I work for Community First in the volunteering department as a young volunteer development worker. I'm currently working on the Young Volunteers project, which covers 13 to 17-year-olds, and we have received 2 years of funding from the National Lottery Community Fund. So from the very beginning of our project launch in August 2021, we've had barriers between young people and organisations and volunteering. So we've created the handbook to send to organisations to help break down those barriers that we've come across so far. So the information has been pulled together from different sources, such as the NSPCC and other volunteering centres. It is essentially a complete comprehensive guide, and we will continue to update and add things as needed. So everything going forward can be found in the handbook. And these are just some of the things you can expect to find, such as child employment and the law, risk assessment, supervision and training, parental permission. And at the end of it, there are some example documents for young volunteers that you are free to use. So firstly, child employment and the law. So what is the difference between a young person and a child? So a young person is anyone under the age of 18, and a child is anyone who has not reached the official minimum school leaving age, which is the year they turn 16. So there are some legal restrictions that do not apply to volunteers. However, it is advisable to follow the guidelines set out in law and legislation to prevent misusing young people. An example of this is that under 16s are prohibited from making house-to-house collections for charities. So it's always important to make sure that the organisation has the correct insurance in place for young volunteers. This will be in your employer's liability insurance, and we can just advise that you go to them to double check who is covered and whether they can cover young people, or even if it's worth finding a new insurance broker to see if there are any more suitable policies. So the first act we have used is Section 18 of the Children and Young Persons Act 1933, and we would advise for any organisation to follow this. This does not directly apply to volunteering opportunities. However, any volunteering opportunities should not place unfair demands on the individual and should only involve suitable tasks and roles. For example, although a volunteer can be under the age of 18, we would advise they would have a parent or guardian present. Another legislation to consider is the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. We've used this one to help organisations when they're looking at current volunteering roles they have and what changes need to be made. For example, an employer must consider the layout of the workplace, the physical, biological and chemical agents that they will be exposed to, how they will handle work equipment, how the work and processes are organised, the extent of health and safety training needed, risks from particular agents, processes and work. And although these are not all relevant to the opportunities you might have, it is important to at least address them, as young people generally have a lack of experience, are unaware of existing or potential risks, and they do have a lack of maturity and knowledge. So one of the most important parts to working with young people are the disclosure and barring checks. It's not as daunting as it might seem, and we would suggest that at least one staff member, paid or volunteer, has an enhanced DBS check if there is an under 18 volunteering. An organisation not only needs to safeguard the young person, but also who they are volunteering with. So if the volunteer is aged 16 or 17 and will be volunteering with other young people under 18, they still will need a DBS check. And we do have a lot more detailed information about getting a DBS in our handbook. But an important thing we have noticed when talking to charities and non-profit organisations is that they are not all aware it is free to carry out a check for a volunteer. So next we cover risk assessments. And so for everything anybody does, there is always going to be a risk. Every volunteer opportunity should have been subject to a risk assessment already. However, when having a young person volunteer for the first time with you, a new risk assessment is needed, as a young person has different needs, such as a risk of exploitation, the emotional impact of the tasks, and young people do have additional pressures in their life compared to adults, such as, but not limited to, exams. So part of creating a new opportunity is regarding some of these extra risks in the workplace. When considering the role you're going to be offering to a young person, these are the most important risks to consider, as if they cannot be avoided, then the young person cannot be involved in this volunteering role. And in this case, a child is under the age of 16. So if you cannot remove any of these risks, then a child cannot carry out any work in relation to this, whether it's volunteering, employed, or in training. However, it is slightly different when it comes to a young person who's 16 plus. They can participate in these activities involving these risks if it is necessary, properly supervised, and the risks are minimised as much as possible. Employers must let the parents or guardians of any young person know the possible risk and measures that are put in place to control them before the young person embarks in this role. This can be done in whatever way is simplest and suitable, including verbally telling the parents. So then we come across to parental permission. So getting parental permission is a very important item to consider, as it will ensure that the volunteer's parent or guardian understands what your organisation does, what the young person will be doing, when and where they will be working, and that they do actually consent to this. So under 16 should always have a parental or guardian consent before they start volunteering. And with 16 and 17-year-olds, it is just good practice to obtain permission if you can, but they should always have an emergency contact details regardless. So there are a few things you can get permission for, and they will depend on the age of the young person, what activities they're going to be doing, what locations they'll be at. And it's also important to not only gain photo consent from a parent or guardian, but from the young person themselves. And parental permission can be any guardian, carer, or parent. And if they are over 16 and living independently of guardians and social services, you don't need parental permission. And for 16 and 17-year-olds, we suggest using your best judgment whether you need to consent for particular items. So when gaining parental permission, it's a good idea to have a written consent form to make them aware of the safeguarding policies you already have in place and what activity they're going to be doing. It's also just as important to find out the young person's circumstances. Do they have other commitments? Do they have exams coming up? Are they in care? Just as overall view of the young person could go a long way to making them feel like an accepted member of your charity. And you should also find out if the young person feels comfortable with all the activities in the role, and you should tell the young person and their parent or guardian what supervision they're going to be having, and as I previously said, to get that emergency contact information. So moving on to induction and training, with all volunteer roles, there should already be some form of induction and training in place. And it's important that you're able to not only provide the same level of induction and training to younger volunteers, but in some cases more. They should be treated with the same respect. And as they are younger and haven't had much or no work experience to date, then it should be expected that they need to receive more. And it isn't just enough to make this training available. It must be used by the young person and they must understand it. And organisations can ask other agencies to support training, and this is often at no cost, for example, this event today. So another different point for organisations to consider is obtaining and providing appropriate equipment for young people, as they might have a different size and strength to current adult volunteers. A small example of this is for a gardening project, they might just need smaller gloves and lighter spades. So safeguarding has been our biggest concern and barrier to date when bringing organisations and young people together. There is no real right or wrong answer to getting it right, but being mindful of the laws and legislations and asking yourself these kinds of questions can go a long way to getting it right. Right away, you should have at least one person present at all times who's had a successful DBS check. You can provide training and information to current staff and volunteers about supporting young people. You need to ensure that young people have a contact number so they can inform you if they cannot make it that day. And likewise, you need their emergency contact information. So here are just some questions you can ask yourself before having a young volunteer with you. Who is going to take full responsibility for the young person and ensure the full training and support is given to them? Who is going to deliver that training and when? Who is the contact for safeguarding issues? And what is included in that training? Safeguarding, rights and responsibilities, professional boundaries, health and safety, communication, and dealing with difficult situations. So safeguarding is not only protecting young people, but you will also need to safeguard those you're working with. For example, a telephone befriender for the elderly. On the outside, it looks like it'd be a good fit for a young person. They're able to work from home. They're not physically interacting with anyone. However, you have to think about that safety of that elderly person. It may be the only contact they have to the outside, and a young person may not be able to understand if that person is struggling or needs additional help and support. They may not think to report it. They might not even notice anything is wrong. And that is okay and completely acceptable to not consider a young person for that role. So with supervision, any young volunteer should have someone who oversees their work. There should be someone who is around while the young volunteer is undertaking that activity and is available for them to go to advice, information or support as needed. And they should also be aware of the work the young volunteer is doing at all times and be able to intervene in cases of any issues. So under 16s will need more supervision and support than 16 plus, but the level of support and supervision is dependent on the young person's maturity. There is a huge difference between a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. So we do believe it would be good practice to have 2 adults overseeing or supervising at all times, as this removes another barrier if one person is not present for any reason, that there will always be someone available. And you must consider whether you can implement a consistent level of supervision at all times so that the safety and protection of children and young people is not impacted whilst in the care of your organisation. It cannot tail off after a few weeks, as the young person will do the same. Consistency and communication is the key. So here are just some different ideas how supervision can look. We found that a simple certificate award after so many hours work can go a long way to make the young person feel appreciated. Action plans can help both sides. You can say what you'd like to expect from the young person, and they can also input what they would like to achieve out of their role. And as young people or young volunteers may require additional support to be able to carry out their role in a safe and effective way. An important point to remember is that everyone is an individual, and some young people may not yet be very mature and may be unfamiliar with the working environment. Some volunteers will need a lot of support, where others may be more confident and not require this additional level of attention. So it can be tailored to each an individual young person. It's also important to be supporting other staff and other volunteers where young volunteers are going to be involved. All volunteers should have the training necessary to equip them with the skills and knowledge they need. You should be giving them a chance to voice their own ideas and opinions about the work, organisation and the role, and there should also be other staff available to talk to who are not directly responsible for volunteers if and when it is necessary. And you should also have a code of conduct. Having a code of conduct for any volunteer is important. It sets out what is expected of them, what they can expect from you. It's even more important to have a simple yet defined version for your young volunteers, as this may be the first work experience they've ever done. Once you've got all that paperwork together, supervision, safeguarding, training and support, and you and the young person are happy, there is no reason why a young volunteer cannot be a valuable member of the team. Don't forget to get that young person to sign it to say they've understood it, and to sign it with them as well. So with a volunteer policy, this can help cross any barriers between the young person and their role. It should be clearly laid out and explain expectations, and it should be signed by the young person. We would also suggest that they are able to sit down with their supervisor to go through the policy and discuss anything they are not sure of before they sign the agreement. This not only gives them the responsibility to own their role, but it gives them the chance to speak up if they aren't sure. This should already be a standard practice for any volunteer, but with a young person, we would suggest that they have the same volunteer policy but with an initial young volunteer agreement, and you can like sign and tick off everything you've gone through to make sure that they understand it. So finally, now you have the organisation ready, the right level of support and training in place, a suitable and an engaging role for a young person, how would you go about getting a young person interested? So due to the pandemic, there are a whole lot of new people looking for volunteering opportunities. They might have missed their work experience. They might need a volunteering opportunity for D&V. So creating an exciting, new, different and engaging roles are the way forward. Young people still love the environment. They're huge on plastic free at the moment. They still love their animals and conservation, outdoor work. They've been trapped inside for 2 years and they want to get out. And they are much better at social media than most. So it's a great opportunity to get them to do it if you're stuck. And it's a great place to get a younger perspective as well. And, you know, because a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds have missed out on their work experience, even the admin and business marketing side of things can be really valuable for them. So to spread the word about our project, we've been getting young people involved in the opportunities we already have, as we've been visiting schools, colleges, youth groups, careers fairs. Sweeps have worked amazingly well to get them to come talk to you. And it's a great way to find out what they're currently interested in and what they want to do. And it's the perfect way to find a role that fits in. So thank you for listening. I talked as fast as I can because I know it was a bit late. So here are my contact details. You can either contact me directly or at the Young Volunteers at cfirst.org.uk. I'm the only one working on this project, so either way it will come to me. Please do visit our website that is dedicated specifically for 13 to 17-year-olds in Hampshire. So, yeah.
Ellie, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And for anyone online today, if you're wishing that you could kind of download all the knowledge that Ellie has in her head, thankfully she's kind of done that for you, because she has produced that handbook on the kind of practical steps that you should be considering when you're engaging young people as volunteers in your organisation. At the end of today's event, we will be sharing a copy of that resource in the chat, and we'll also include in the follow-up email that we'll send out to everyone shortly after today's event. So we've got 22 minutes left. Let's head off into breakout rooms for the next 15 minutes or so. We're going to come back into this main room at 11:53 just to do the final bits of wrap up. So we're going to head off into breakout sessions. Each breakout room will have a dedicated member of NCVO staff to help facilitate the conversation. You'll also be joined by some of our guest presenters in those rooms as well. It's a bit of a free-for-all. You can just reflect on the things you've heard today, the things you're inspired about, the action that you want to take. But you also might want to share some of the concerns or challenges that you have, because other people in the room might have some solutions to those problems that you envisage that you may be facing. So Chanel, if I could ask you to set up those kind of breakout rooms, you should each kind of get a little pop-up window on your screen asking you to join one of 7 or 8 breakout rooms. Please click yes, and we'll see you back here in this main room at 11:53. Great, so I think that's everyone back here in the main room. I hope those breakout discussions went well. You got the chance to kind of share your ideas, your thoughts, maybe your kind of questions with other people in the room, and you kind of got some answers to some of the things that you might have been kind of a little bit kind of concerned about. Apologies if we don't have time today for a formal Q&A session. I know that we had a couple of questions that did pop up in the chat, and I think that they've all been addressed by the individual speakers who we've had today. So before we go, just to share and highlight some resources and support that we think will come in handy when you're thinking about kind of engaging young people as volunteers in your organisation. First up is Ellie's Young Volunteers Handbook that she's written that aims to break the barriers that charities and non-profit organisations have with placing young people aged 13 to 17 in volunteering opportunities. Next, NCVO has a whole section on involving volunteers on our website that has practical and step-by-step guidance to help you manage volunteers, including writing a volunteer role description. There's a section on safeguarding, writing a volunteer policy and a volunteer agreement. I just want to highlight as well a couple of training events that we have kind of coming up where NCVO members do get discounted places. So first is the good practice in volunteer management, and second is safeguarding essentials in charities. Both of these courses are delivered online, so wherever you are in the country, you can kind of easily join and participate in those training events. And finally, obviously, kind of NSPCC have a whole host of safeguarding resources for voluntary and community groups, and a link to all the things that I've just kind of referenced have been popped into the chat box by Chanel. So that almost brings us to the end of today's workshop. Chanel is about to launch a very quick snap poll, which will appear on your screen any second now, to get your initial thoughts on how you found today's session. This is a completely anonymous poll, and the results aren't being made public. We also have a SurveyMonkey evaluation of 5 or 6 questions, which will only take a few minutes to complete if you have the time, where you'll be able to give your feedback on the things that you enjoyed about today's session, where we can make improvements, and what further support you'd like to see from NCVO in supporting you to engage young volunteers in volunteer roles. Again, Chanel's posting the link to that SurveyMonkey evaluation survey in the chat. So all that's left for me today are to share my thanks. So this workshop wouldn't have been possible without the kind contributions of our guest speakers. So if I can ask everyone who's online today to now click on the reactions toolbar at the bottom of your screen to show your love and appreciation for our brilliant guest speakers today. So a massive thank you goes to Devon and Detty from East Riding's Voluntary Action, Andrew and Daniel from St John Ambulance, Becca and Rakaya from Reclaim, and finally, Ellie from Community First. My final thanks go to you. Thank you for attending today's event. I hope you found it inspiring, insightful, and you're leaving us with the motivation to talk to your colleagues about new ways that you can engage and support young people to volunteer with your organisation and in your communities. We absolutely wish you the best of luck in your effort to engage a whole new cohort of volunteers. So until next time, have a lovely afternoon, and thank you again so much for joining us today.